So I was walking down the wide hallway outside of the convention center ballroom up in Billings this week. Ballrooms where the annual conference plenary sessions were being held, and I encountered a colleague of mine who I have known for decades. We actually went to the same church when I first moved to Colorado a while back. And I just automatically, like I've done with so many of you, said, "How you doing?" And as I was saying it, I wanted desperately to claw it back, because it dawned on me as I was speaking that she had had a rough year this year. Her marriage ended in this last year, since I'd seen her last. And I was suddenly painfully aware that question that I tend to ask a lot, "How you doing?" or "How's it going?" it's just an automatic thing for me so much of the time, but it is really kind of a dangerous way to say hi to someone. If the person's really doing fine, it's pretty harmless. But I usually just blurt it out in passing, not actually expecting a long answer to that question. It's a greeting, it's an acknowledgement, it's kind of a verbal nod. But in that moment, I realized it was not a good way to greet this particular person unless I was ready to settle in for her answer. Because how she was, if she was honest, would take a while to unpack. And I was convicted anew that question, "How you doing?" is just not a great salutation. I will continue to flub up and do it, but feel free to stop me and say, "I've got an answer for you," if I do. Because the way I most often casually toss it out is really encouraging people to answer casually too. Often there's a fine, or "I'm better than I deserve," or some comment about the weather, right? Unless it's Bob Stansberry, then the answer is always "outstanding." And the truth is that each of us on any given day, at any given moment, is carrying a complex bundle of potential answers to that question, "How's it going?" And the psalmist captures it in our first reading this morning that we just heard. And then Paul captures it too in our reading from his second letter to the church at Corinth. Hear these words from 2 Corinthians chapter 12. "I was given a thorn in my body because of the outstanding revelations I've received, so that I would not be conceited. It's a messenger from Satan sent to torment me so that I wouldn't be conceited. I pleaded with the Lord 3 times for it to leave me alone. He said to me, 'My grace is enough for you, because power is made perfect in weakness. So I will gladly spend my time bragging about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power can rest on me. Therefore, I'm all right with weaknesses, insults, disasters, harassments, and stressful situations for the sake of Christ. Because when I'm weak, then I am strong.'" This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. So in Kate Bowler's latest book, right here, we're going to look at this for the next few weeks, she recounts a friend's wedding outdoors in Minnesota in October. Kate was a bridesmaid at this particular wedding, and she was freezing in her turquoise dress while she was loving her view from up front of the beautiful, buoyant crowd of friends and family, including, right down in front, the mother of the bride, who had tears of joy streaming down her face. But not long after that wondrous day, the family were shedding a different sort of tears because the bride's mother was taken from them far too early by a car accident. And there was a funeral that followed too soon after that wedding. Now, Kate Bowler has her own story to tell. Assuming I can get there. She says, I was 35 years old when I was diagnosed with incurable stage 4 cancer. I'd married my high school sweetheart, finally had a son after years of infertility, and secured my dream job as a university professor. Then, suddenly, every hope had to be placed back on the shelf. I lived for years assuming that each season would be my last. It's hard for those who haven't lived with it to understand the feelings that coexist with existential terror. From one moment to the next, I could only expect that anything might happen. I might feel genuinely terrified about my life, which was unraveling, or lulled into boredom in every waiting room. Or I might think I was going to finally get back to work, only to use up all my energy trying to get my hair into a decent ponytail without pressing down on the wretched IV on the back of my hand. Years later, I had mostly made it through the fog, and I was watching my friend, that grieving bride, make her own perilous way forward, able to see only a couple of feet in front of her. I wanted to tell her what I had learned from that time of my life that had been marked by grief, the unforgettable periods sticky with jello and the specter of death. I wanted to give her a promise that reasonable people would be too reluctant to guarantee, but it is one I would hang my life on. You will never be cured of this grief, it's true, but you will be joyful anyway, I swear. So the book is titled Joyful Anyway. And it delves into the tremendous tension in our lives between the parts that don't live up to our expectations and sometimes shatter those expectations, and the deep, abiding, and often unpredictable joy that persists. The experiencing of that joy doesn't depend on everything getting better, she writes. Bowler describes the tension between those things as an ache. And I think Psalm 42 that we heard this morning does a pretty good job of expressing that tension. Craving God with my whole being, thirsting like those deer panting for the water. I've had to survive on my own tears, it says. I can't see you, oh God. My whole being is depressed. But why? Because I know God is my hope. God is there to save me. God is the one who makes water flow, whose waves of living water quench the deepest thirst. And two things can be true at the same time. How many times have you been struggling with the hurdles and burdens of your world only to hear of the terrible day that somebody else is having? And all of a sudden, your stuff doesn't seem so bad. Or maybe, in the middle of your own personal hell of a day, a bright spot appears. I had this happen a few years ago now. One of the things that I did as a district superintendent was to be present for dozens of disaffiliation votes in local churches across the eastern plains of Colorado. And I scheduled them all for weekends. But that meant that sometimes I scheduled 2 or even 3 votes on a day, on a Saturday and then on a Sunday, so that I could do them all in efficient trips. There was one Sunday afternoon, that I had just finished my 5th vote of the weekend, and these were hard because these were church families who were voting to leave the United Methodist Church. And I tried to be as gracious and kind and warm through all of those as I could, but it took a toll to have our larger extended family seemingly disintegrating, and we had more in my district than we had anywhere else across the annual conference. And that day, I just finished my 5th vote of the weekend and was on the highway driving out of town, and I just started to weep. It was just too much. I was by myself in the car. If I didn't tell you about it, nobody would know. It was a hard day, hard afternoon. And on this highway, where there was barely a phone signal, my phone rang. And on the other end of the line was my friend Mandy, who I hadn't spoken with literally for decades, probably 15 to 20 years. She's a pastor over on the East Coast. At the time, she was in Maryland. And she just happened to think she ought to give me a call on that Sunday afternoon. In the middle of the worst day I'd had in a long time, a light shone in that darkness. Bowler, though, talks about that ache bringing with it an intense longing. Just as that psalmist longs for water like a thirsty deer, we long for wholeness, for completeness, for things to make sense, for the scattered pieces of our existence to come together in some sort of order. Chapter 6 of the book is simply a list of what she found when she asked strangers on the internet to share with her what they ache for. Here are a few of these. One more moment with my son. Some peace of mind about money would be nice. Send me some? Somewhere to call home. For my soulmate to live forever. Yes, I'm talking about my dog. Being pain-free for a day. A real friend who returns your text right away and doesn't make you feel weird when you ask for something. A cure for regret and an explanation for why I still want him back. Allergy relief for the love of all that is pollen. My daughter-in-law to stop trash-talking me to my son. A job that makes my family respect me. Potato chips. What would you add to the list? What is it that you ache for, that you long for? A big part of our problem, Bowler says, is that we live in a culture where we are encouraged to think that we can have it all. It's an abiding myth that we are all invited to adopt in this country, in this culture. A myth not being a falsehood, but a narrative that we see ourselves plugged into. So we North Americans think we can solve the ache. You've heard it before. You may have said it before. Anything's possible if you believe. Everything is there for the taking. If you work hard enough, you can achieve anything. But what happens when the myth doesn't work out the way we envisioned? Mary Chapin Carpenter sings a haunting song. It's one of my favorites called The Moon and St. Christopher. Now, early in the song, one of the lines says, "An open door was to a girl like the stars are to the sky." And then, over the course of the song, as she grows older and arrives in her more mature years, the line changes. And she sings, "An open door is to me now like the saddest of goodbyes." Some hopes and dreams come to pass, and others never come to fruition. We make the choice to walk through one door in life, not noticing until much later the doors that simultaneously closed without our knowledge. We go to school, we accept a job offer, we get married, we have kids. All of those things posing new opportunities while foreclosing on others. A few things Kate lists as her own causes of the ache. An incomplete list, she says. The baby you didn't have. Fear for the ones you did. Thinking too carefully about the future of polar bears and bees. What's going on with any ex anywhere? He's not happier, is he? Gosh, I hope not. Floating unknown in a sea of email. Parents gone too soon. Losing parents before death, anyway. Realizing that not everything is going to fall into place. Not seeing the pyramids. Seeing the pyramids, but looking back and realizing you were too stressed about everything to enjoy them, for Pete's sake. Realizing you're the kind of person who misses out on life because you're too busy taking care of other people. Falling into the quicksand of pain or discounting your nicest moments. The last one, everybody knows it. We're led to believe that there is a cure for every want. And so we come to believe that happiness is a realistic expectation in our lives. It's in our nation's founding documents, for heaven's sake. Pursuit of happiness. The problem with that is that it can keep us from dealing with the things that we've actually lost. It's tough to be resilient. It's tough to bounce back, to get back up when we've been knocked down, if we can't be honest with ourselves about our struggles. But if we can be honest about those things, about those longings that we cling to, we may actually be able to reframe our lives. We can begin to experience our lives as a source of strength that allows us to engage the world more honestly, more authentically. Paul writes about the thorn that he struggles with in life. Readers and scholars and people have speculated down through the centuries about what that thorn may have been in Paul's life. But there haven't been any clear conclusions about that. What is clear is that Paul's desire for it to be removed was a deep longing for him. He clearly grieved the impact it had on his life and on his mission. on his ministry. Yet, when he asked God for relief, God had other plans. It's kind of like you may remember in that movie, Evan Almighty, when Morgan Freeman, playing God, sits down next to Evan's wife, and he talks with her about what happens when people pray for patience, and asks her whether when people pray for patience, does God just snap a finger and give them patience, or does God give them the opportunity to be patient? God, through Jesus and the cross, showed us that weakness in the world's terms is actually God's checkmate response to the powers of this world and the games that they play with our lives. God's power is made manifest through our weakness, because that is when we are forced to stop believing that we can achieve it all on our own. We lean on faith and hope and love, and we rely on God to make a way where there doesn't seem to be one. And that's what God tells Paul about this thorn in his life. It's an opportunity for Paul to connect with God's upside down way of being with us in this world. So, we have to learn to turn into the skid of our lives. We have to face the ache. We have to lean into the longing, to acknowledge the grief of loss. Where we feel the weakest and the most vulnerable. And we come to grips with how we really are. That's where God meets us and makes us strong. So, next week, we'll move from the ache into mourning. Mourning. Because dealing with the grief that comes with that longing, with that ache, is how we move forward then to living and to making space for the deep and abiding joy that God gives us.